I was in the ministry a total of 5 years. And so I got very good at leading the split life. It's exhausting, by the way, to lead two lives. And it was on a fateful Christmas Eve, ironically, on my way to lead a candlelight service in Fort Lauderdale that I pulled over to offer a woman a ride out of the rain, unaware of what she was doing until she was in the car and propositioning me. I actually quit the ministry. I was never caught. I actually quit the ministry after 5 years. So at the age of 30, I retired from the one thing I trained to do.
Oh, wow.
And now, freed from the constraints of the ministry and now starting really to make money, that's when the addiction really took off. It was a very, very, very dark dozen years.
I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition. Welcome back to the Life in Transition podcast. I'm very excited to have with us today a new friend of mine who I've really connected with in the last weeks, Nate Larkin. Nate is a speaker, he's a writer, he's founder of the Samson Society, and he owns a technical writing company. Nate, most welcome to the Life in Transition podcast. Glad you're here.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks so much. First question jumping in, Nate, is what would you consider to be one of the most meaningful transitions that you have been through in your life?
Yeah, I would say it's hard to narrow down. I would say it's between two. One, the most recent would be my entry into recovery, which happened in 1998. But before that, it was transition from the ministry, the career I had trained for, studied for, the only one I'd ever seen myself in, transitioning from that into civilian life. And that happened in 1987.
I will, because of my familiarity with it and the importance I know it is in my own life, I'd like to dig into the recovery.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sure. Yeah.
Because I think that's something that I know is very powerful for a lot of people and a really good thing. So tell us a little bit about that. That was, you said it was 1997?
1998.
1998.
Yeah. My addiction, I'm pretty talented when it comes to addiction. So I can develop an unhealthy dependency on work, on alcohol, but my primary addiction is sex. One that I was really set up for in a highly restricted puritanical upbringing where I didn't really get any sex education except for a lot of shame around it. And then a lot of emotional neglect, physical neglect, some abuse, all of which really set me up for an addiction to pornography is how it began, with softcore stuff. One that I was certain marriage would solve.
Right. Which is often the promise of the puritanical upbringing, right? Marriage is going to make everything better, right?
Yeah, because I sincerely thought that it was all about sex. So once sex was okay, no longer verboten, and once I had a willing partner, then certainly this obsession would disappear. And instead, it metastasized. Right. So, and it progressed from softcore porn to hardcore porn, the kind of stuff any unsupervised 6-year-old can find in 2 minutes today on the internet. I saw for the first time as a married man and a student at Princeton Seminary. I was on a seminary-sponsored trip into New York City in a peep show booth in Times Square that I got my first look. And I really did not understand at the time. First of all, I didn't understand that sexual fantasy had become my default distress management strategy.
Right.
And I didn't understand how much more powerful those moving images were than the still images I'd been using up until that point. Because film is immersive.
Right.
It reaches a part of the brain that really cannot distinguish between virtual experience and actual experience. And so now, but it was highly, highly stimulating, very addictive. I really, at that point, I had found my drug. But I'm also studying for the ministry. There's no way I can be open and honest about this activity. I've got to hide it. And I hid it very, very successfully as it progressed. And I fought it.
Two key things for addiction going on here. First is how you're managing your stress. right? I think
Yeah,
that a lot
yeah,
of people
right,
don't realize
exactly.
there's a whole bunch of different drugs or methods, but however you manage your stress, the discomfort that you're feeling. So
Yep,
that's first thing. And then the
yep,
second thing, when you start to see that you have to hide it,
yeah. Oh, yeah,
right? Then
yeah,
you know that it's a pretty strong addiction at that point.
absolutely. Right, yeah. And so I got very good at leading the split life. It's exhausting, by the way, to lead two lives. And I had these periods of abstinence, which I mistook for sobriety.
Mm,
It was during one of those periods that I actually made the leap. By now, we'd moved to South Florida. I made the leap into full time ministry, became a church planter, became a pastor. The thing that I had been always told I was destined to do. My
right, right,
my dad had been a pastor. It was the one thing I'd trained for. I seemed to have all the requisite tools. I'm a good upfront man. People love me, right?
right,
Build a crowd. but uh, but I'm medicating with something that I have to keep a secret.
right.
And it's exhausting to run two lives.
And how long did that continue? How long were you running these two lives, Nate?
I was in the ministry a total of 5 years. It was 3.5 years into that career that the addiction progressed further.
Mm,
By that point, I'd been essentially sitting in a simulator every day,
right, right.
programming myself for automatic responses. And it was on a fateful Christmas Eve, ironically, on my way to lead a candlelight service in Fort Lauderdale that I pulled over to offer a woman a ride out of the rain, unaware of what she was doing until she was in the car and propositioning me. Now, I
Mm,
didn't think that I was capable of actually ever cheating on my wife. I loved my wife, and I
hmm.
meant it when I said I was going to be faithful to her.
Right.
But I went full auto. I had seen some version of that scenario countless times and
Mm,
participated
mm,
vicariously. Count.
So that tape is already running in your head.
Oh,
You already
absolutely.
lived it hundreds of times, probably maybe thousands of times.
Right, exactly. And then just the disgust and self-loathing and self-hatred when I resurfaced in consciousness when it was over. And then I had to go lead a Christmas Eve service, for God's.
How did you manage that? How do you reconcile those two worlds in your own
Yeah,
mind?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I learned to flip. I learned to toggle,
Okay.
right? Um, but
It's
that's
compartmentalizing to the extreme here.
and that's extremely stressful. And it does lead to such self-loathing.
Mm,
And I somehow thought that I could shame my way out of what essentially was shame-based behavior.
hmm.
I really thought if I could hate myself or hate the behavior enough, I could stop and I could never ever hit bottom.
Mm, mm. So you somehow on your own, if you were repulsed enough by the behavior, then you could just, I'll say it this way, magically stop.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I thought. I actually quit the ministry. I was never caught.
Hmm.
I actually quit the ministry after 5 years. So at the age of 30, I retired from the one thing I've trained to do.
And was this retirement, I'll say in quotes, from the ministry, was it driven completely by this sex addiction?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was a fear of getting caught and being exposed. Actually, I was exhausted. I felt that I plateaued in ministry. And if I did manage to gain a higher profile, it only put me at greater danger. It was at that
Right,
time in history when famous preachers were all over the news
right.
with
For all
sex.
the wrong reasons.
Exactly. And I wasn't well known, but I had built a good reputation, and I couldn't stand the thought of losing that, the public humiliation that would come when I
Right.
was inevitably discovered. So yeah, so I quit. I pled burnout, and I suppose burnout was part of it. It's very exhausting doing what I was doing.
Yeah, especially when, as you said, when you're compartmentalizing so much, right?
Yeah, yeah,
When you're
yeah.
hiding so much.
And it was after I retired that I fortuitously ran into a book in the Fort Lauderdale Public Library called "Playing Hardball with Soft Skills." The premise of the book was that in a world that is increasingly specialized, any generalist who can communicate between specialties is going to be highly valuable.
Mm, okay.
So I had been trained to to interpret ancient writings for contemporary audiences, and that involves a lot of translation.
Right.
I found that that those skills were transferable. I'm not an engineer, never had an engineering course in my life,
Right.
but I can understand a structural or a civil engineer, architectural engineer.
Right.
And if that engineer needs to communicate with a non technical client, typically those men and women tend to communicate in engineerese. A big complaint of non technical clients when they read an engineering report is they can't understand what it says,
Right. Yeah.
right? Okay.
Yep.
So I can communicate for them, I can translate, and I found my niche.
Right. Right.
And now, freed from the constraints of the ministry, uh, and now starting really to make money, that's when the addiction really took off.
Mm.
Because now I had an unlimited expense account. I had lots of reasons to travel. Turns out I eventually became a trial consultant because I could coordinate all the expert testimony in a
Right.
construction case, for example.
Right.
And man, it was a very, very, very dark dozen years.
When did you finally hit bottom? When did you finally realize that this is not something that you could manage on your own?
Yeah, it was shortly after we made the move from South Florida to Tennessee. We moved here to be close to our first grandchild. It was shortly after that that my wife caught me.
Mm.
First of all,
And how many years had gone by? So it was 98.
so that was 1998 when we moved. It was shortly
Okay.
after we moved that she caught me.
Okay.
At that point, we'd been married 20 years.
Wow. Wow.
Our youngest was a senior in high school,
Okay.
and I had a great reputation.
So this whole time, this has been completely hidden.
Oh yeah. Now Allie was very protective of me, and she projected to the world that I was the ideal husband, but
Mm.
she really
Right.
was emotionally isolated
Mm.
uh, because I was bonding with phantoms or with strangers.
Right.
And I had no emotional vocabulary. I was inaccessible, right? Well, she caught me first with porn. And then a week or so later, she found a condom on the floor in the bathroom that I couldn't quite explain.
Mm.
And that's when she sat me down on the edge of our bed and said the words that saved my life. She said, "I'm done."
Mm. Mm.
She said, "I still love you, but I don't like you. I don't trust you. I don't respect you. I don't think you can ever change."
Mm.
And that's what gave me the gift of desperation.
Yeah, that's what hit you, brought you to the bottom, brought you down to.
Yeah, yeah. And that's when I was fortunate enough to find recovery for the first time in a 12-step group for sex addicts. First of all, I had never, ever, ever been in a room that safe. And I had never heard that kind of vulnerability and honesty. I'd never felt that much empathy, that much kindness from a bunch of broken people.
How did that affect you when you felt that safe and
Oh,
that much empathy, that much understanding? How did that? What happened? I want to say physiologically, even. Like,
oh.
what happened?
Well, it slowly, I was slowly coaxed out of the shadows. It's not like I immediately blurted out the whole truth. I still posed for a while, but
Mhm.
as I found that it was okay to say the real truth and that people would lean in rather than pull away.
Mm. Mm. So all this that you'd been protecting out of fear of losing your reputation, losing your place in society, losing all this huge perceived loss if you were to be seen as you
Yes, yeah,
actually were,
yeah, yeah.
well, you were starting to see that in this isolated situation, in this space, could be maybe even the opposite, not just safe, but the opposite.
And I was in a room for the first time where failure wasn't fatal. I'd grown up in a church world war where if any guy was foolhardy enough to take our rhetoric about grace at face value and actually confess some kind of sexual sin, or if he'd been caught,
Right.
I mean, we just landed on him with all 4 feet. And what I feel terrible about to this day is I actually participated.
Sort of setting that type of culture or perpetuating that type of culture.
Oh, absolutely, sure. So to find out that these were people who understand that that addiction is a progressive disease. Recovery is a process. It also is progressive.
And if I can add to addiction is a progressive disease that is fatal if
Yes.
not arrested.
Yes,
It's
absolutely.
absolutely fatal if not addressed.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the addiction is.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I feel at this point fortunate that my particular addiction is one of the more shameful ones, at least in today's culture.
Why do you feel fortunate for that?
Because the fact that I now have no more shame about it, my ability to talk about it often makes me the safest guy in the room. And I also, by the way, I did need I need a little work on my ego.
A little, Nate.
I have messianic ambition. So it really it has served me well. I have learned humility in a way I would never have learned humility. I don't think if I'd fallen victim to something that was a little more socially acceptable.
This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Midlife Transition Mastery. If you have reached midlife and you are successful, you have checked all the boxes, you've done everything you thought you should do, and especially pleasing everybody else, doing what you think everyone else needs you to do, but you still feel like something's missing, like you're coming up empty, feeling alone, feeling misguided or lost. Midlife Transition Mastery Explorer community is for you. Here we will build authentic community. We will learn about the 8 steps to mastering midlife transition, and we will learn and execute living life with no regrets in our second half. Please check out the community on lifeintransition.online/MLTM, Midlife Transition Mastery. And I look forward to seeing you around the fire in this community. Yeah, it's interesting. When I'm reflecting now on addictions, when you said it's the most shameful, and to you, I'm sure that it is, right? And I think about in the society you were raised in and participated in and living in as an adult, it probably is. But if I think about the actual harm that can be done from a really deep alcoholic, drinking and driving or beating his wife and kids, I mean, it's funny how society as a whole puts different labels on what's okay and not okay. And my addiction is one that society heralds as workaholism, right? But it almost killed me. Right. And isolated me from my family and friends and God and everything else. Right. And yet it's okay. Alcoholism is, everybody's probably a little bit that way, but if you're a sexaholic, that's not, I mean, it's just interesting how we label things. Right. And it doesn't make any difference really.
I'll tell you another thing. My addiction, I spent a few $100,000 on my addiction, and I had to do that. I had to hide that money,
so
right?
A lot of energy. Yeah.
So I didn't keep honest books. In fact, I didn't even look at money. So I have not been a good steward of. I've made a lot of money. I've blown a lot of money.
Right.
Oddly enough, it took me a lot of time, even after I got sexually sober. I was sexually sober, but still not paying attention to money and behaving irrationally financially, to the point where I got behind in taxes. I got that finally came to a head when the IRS knocked on the door.
Right. Yeah, that'll wake you up.
Oh, yeah. I had more shame around my financial behavior than I had around my sexual behavior.
Interesting.
Because somehow in my mind, every red-blooded American male, has sexual urges, but a real man can handle his money.
Right.
So I played the role of the competent businessman.
Right.
I picked up checks I couldn't afford to pick up.
Right.
I lived larger than I could afford to live.
Right.
And that hiddenness was driven a lot by shame.
Yeah, interesting how, and the thing that I think is interesting is that all of this, what makes it heavy, what makes it shameful, what makes it draining with so much energy is all a construct of what we make. It's not God's grace. It's really not even other people.
Right.
It's what we set up in our own rules, in our own mind that makes it unacceptable.
Yes.
There was a part of me when I started really working through my story that I identified as this unacceptable one. I called him a sewer boy, actually. And the deeper I went into it, the more I realized I was the one that felt he was unacceptable.
Uh-huh.
It
Yeah.
wasn't like at first I was like, oh, society, right? No,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it was me,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
right? It's the cage that we put ourselves in
No doubt.
that has the strongest bars.
Yes.
Whether they're steel or completely imagined,
Yes.
they're
Yeah.
still the strongest bars.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say one of the biggest challenges in recovery for me has been learning to ask for help and accept.
It's really, and again, I know WA better than any other programs. I know some other programs a little bit, but, WA, one of the things we talk about is recognizing that anybody around us can do whatever we can do really just as well as we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And very hard for people I'll say for myself, right? For someone with a big ego and ambition,
Yeah.
right? To acknowledge that actually that's quite true. When I get sick and handed off big chunks of my job to my team members, they did just fine. And I found a new joy in growing them instead of me trying to be the center of attention. But
Yes.
it's hard to acknowledge that there's other people around that can do it just as well as I can.
I have had to learn that in my technical writing business. I have a dozen employees. And for the longest time, I held on to the editorial spot.
Right.
I made sure that no report went out until I had, and I was a ruthless editor, by the way,
Right.
ruthless, always improving it. And then I reached this as the Samson Society grew, and the demands on my time grew, and I was stressful and all that kind of stuff. And so, my sponsor and some other friends said, "You gotta let go. You've got to delegate." And I turned editing over to my son, and the clients never noticed.
Yeah, no, it's really something. There's two stories that come to mind. One is I had a boss tell me one time, and not in a bad way, but just as a way of taking stress off, like take your hand out of a bucket of water and see the hole you'll leave in the organization if you were to leave.
Oh, wow.
Right. And that was not bad. He was saying that as a way to take pressure on myself. And then there's another one. You may know Marshall Goldsmith, who's famous coach and author. He lives here in Nashville now, actually. But he talks a lot about as a leader, right? Someone comes to you with an idea that's a 95% good idea, and they're 100% enthusiastic about it. And as a leader, we think we have to fix the last 5% of the idea.
Yeah.
And then they're 50% enthusiastic about it.
Oh,
And implementation is the quality of the idea times the enthusiasm to implement.
yeah.
Right. So you either have a 50% implementation or a 95% because the idea is 95%, but it's their idea and they're on fire and they're going to bring the whole thing through.
Oh,
Right. So that we actually, by fixing that little half percent, 1%, 5%, we're actually making things much worse than just letting them go and be somebody else's idea and let them take it across the finish line.
You know what? I needed to hear that today because I have just a brother in the Samson Society has just sent me something he's been working very hard on, and it's wonderful. I would put it at 95%.
Yeah, and then it doesn't need fixed.
It
doesn't need fixed.
Yeah.
I can remember my deputy when I was one of my big jobs that I had. My deputy, one time we finished up a meeting in my office and he walked out and he's like, "Whoa, yeah," pumping his arm in the air. And I'm like, "Yo, whoa, Sean, what's that about?" And he said, "That's the first time you have not fixed one of my projects. It was good enough." And what he didn't realize, all of them were good enough, but I had just met with Marshall Goldsmith right before that. And I had learned to let good enough be good enough.
Yeah.
And he was so excited. And then the trajectory of what he was able to handle after that, he probably already was. I wasn't able to see what he could handle, but took so much pressure off of me. Right. So yeah, it's really important. You said that you were glad that you had this most shameful one. What did you learn from that? What did that bring forth in your life now, Nate?
One of the things I found out was that I am not unique. There's that phrase in 12-step recovery. We all think that we're terminally unique, right? And so I'm the biggest pervert on the planet, or I'm the biggest failure, the biggest.
Yeah. I think we toggle, actually, my experience, we toggle between self-aggrandizement and self-bashing.
Oh, sure.
Right? We're either the worst guy or we're the best guy, right? We're Superman or supervillain, right? At least in my experience, right? With myself.
Yeah.
And the fact is, neither are true at all. And once you're in recovery, you get to see that your problems are sort of middle of the road.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. But I did coming in. I did think, I'm the piece of shit the universe revolves around, right?
Right. Right.
But turns out, as I lose my shame around this behavior, and I'm willing to talk about it, I find out first of all, I'm far from alone.
Hmm.
My willingness to talk about it opens the door for other guys to talk about it, and now we can pool experience. We can pool experience, strength, and hope. There we are, the
Right.
big three of 12-step, right?
Yep. Know it well.
I used to, when I was a preacher, I was an inspirational preacher, and I told a lot of success stories,
Right.
right?
America loves those.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And I was part of a community that really wanted their pastor to be the guy who climbed up, they put him on a pedestal and paid him to stay there. And his
Mhm.
job was to explain on a weekly basis how to live the successful Christian life.
Right.
And as long as you stayed on the pedestal, they would pay you, you were fine. But if you fell off the pedestal or jumped, right, you were toast and they'd replace you in a heartbeat.
Yeah. And that's based on the flawed premise that we think that somebody whose life is worth emulating is one that doesn't have any mistakes,
Right,
which
exactly.
of course is bullshit. I mean, sorry to say.
I really thought that I was inspiring people when I really think that what I was doing most of the time was impressing and intimidating people.
Hmm. Hmm.
I have found that I am much more helpful, whether it's in a one on one conversation or whether I'm talking to a crowd of a couple thousand people. I am much more helpful as speaking out of vulnerability, weakness, uh, honesty, transparency, much more helpful
Yeah. Yeah.
than when I was trying to convince myself and everybody else that I had all my shit together.
When did you have that realization, Nate? When did you get it that it's stronger to be weak than to be strong?
Yeah, I learned it over time. I saw it modeled so much in 12-step recovery. It was confusing at first. I remember, meeting with my first sponsor, and he told me about, you know, uh, 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 how close he'd come to a relapse the day before,
Mm.
and I thought, holy smokes! I
Right.
mean,
This is the guy that's supposed to have the answers for you.
yeah, right. Yeah. But he was making himself safe
Yeah.
so that when I hit the white water, as I inevitably did,
Sure.
of course, early on, I was in what the alkies call the pink cloud, and I really thought in that first few weeks that I'd crack the code, and
You were special again. You're special in your addiction. Now you're special in your recovery.
yeah, exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I have learned that no matter where I'm speaking, it's the power of vulnerability and honesty. Really, it doesn't mean that there aren't answers. It's just that I don't have all of them.
Well, and I think too that if people are looking up to you on a pedestal, then they cannot connect. It's automatically a separation.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And the way, I mean, we are built, and you and I talked about this in our lovely walk for an hour and a half the other morning. We're built to be in community,
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
and we learn and love and connect and grow out of the safety of a community.
yeah. Right, exactly.
And
Yeah,
that vulnerability is the absolute, um, petri dish for building community.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Without that, it's, we can have a lot of bravado. We can, yell for the same sports teams, but it's not the same as if somebody really sees you.
Yes, yes. Those years when I was fighting so hard to keep uh, protect my reputation,
Hmm.
I was well known in my small circle, but nobody knew me.
Right.
I got a lot of praise, but the praise meant nothing to
Yeah.
me
And tell me why it meant nothing, Nate.
because the deep conviction that if they saw who I really am, they would be disgusted.
So the praise wasn't actually even yours. The way you
Right,
held it, it was for
right.
some image of you that you were projecting out there that was not you.
Exactly, exactly.
So therefore, it meant nothing. All the good words and congratulations and so forth.
Meant nothing. Meant nothing at all. And people named their kids after me, and people would say Nate's my best friend, all that. But I knew that the guy they were meeting was not the real guy.
Right. Right.
Now people meet the real guy most
Right.
of the time.
Right.
Most of the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still capable of putting on the dog a little bit. I am
But
capable
that's
of
also part of the real guy. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you include the rest of it,
exactly,
right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah,
nothing wrong with that, with enthusiasm and woo and being able to connect with people and inspire people. There's nothing wrong with that at all,
yeah, yeah.
right? It's the gifts that you're given, right? But not to use them as a separation, but as a connection, which requires being able to see the rest of it as well.
But I'll tell you what, I absolutely love right now the life I have and the privilege that I have of just giving guys hope who've lost hope.
So talk to us a little bit about that. I want to hear a little bit about, you said the founder of the Samson Society, and I know a little bit about it, but maybe not all of our listeners do. So obviously that's I'm going to say it this way, and forgive me if this is too trite, a huge passion project for you that's made a
Oh,
difference in
absolutely.
thousands and tens of thousands of people's lives.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about the Samson Society and where was that born from, and what's its mission? What's going on?
Well, it started, in this church where Allie and I were attending. Ironically, the 12-step group where I got started. Obviously, it's not a Christian group. We talked higher power. I came in uber religious. Told my, I actually thought in my first few meetings that I was probably there as a missionary, because these poor people, my higher power could beat up their higher power.
Right, right, right.
And then as I really became immersed in that spirituality, I met God in a whole new way in those
Mm,
12
yeah.
steps, right in the basement of the church in the middle of the week while all the good people are gone, right?
I
And
know exactly, and I'm raising my hand. 100% agree.
yeah,
Me too.
so yeah, so God got bigger, God got closer, God
Yeah,
got kinder. The Bible changed on me.
yeah,
I'd been trained to read it a certain way.
yeah,
Well, those filters were off, and I came to it now with empathy and kindness and humility and grace and acceptance. Holy smokes, it changed.
yeah.
And as I lost my shame, I actually told my pastor with my story. I'd been invited to help teach a Sunday school class, and I told him that I couldn't
Because,
because
yeah,
because I was in recovery for sex addiction, and I couldn't guarantee that I wouldn't slip again.
yeah.
And this wonderful, wise pastor said, "For God's sake, teach the class." And he said, "By the way, I've got to be out of town in a few weeks. Would you preach for me?"
All right.
Right? I found that I really wanted to be able to integrate my Christian vocabulary and my Christian faith with this amazing life of recovery
Mm, mm.
because they are compatible.
Yes, yeah,
And so as I started to tell my story a little more openly, it started to attract other guys. And so we decided to start a mutual aid society for Christian men, not exclusively for porn and sex addicts, because not all these guys were struggling with what I was struggling with.
but this was guys in the church that had the Christian vocabulary and the Christian desire, and not a safe place to talk about the things that they considered unchristian.
That's right, exactly. And so we started the Samson Society. We started with a dozen guys in 2004.
And this was just based on from your church and your community here
That's
in
right.
Middle
Yeah,
Tennessee.
yeah. And it grew very quickly. So in 2007, we put out a book hoping to inspire some other guys to do what we were doing. The book is Samson and the Pirate Monks. Since then, about 600 local groups of the Samson Society have started.
Wow.
Now, those groups had a pretty high mortality rate, especially during COVID. But fortunately, a couple of years before the pandemic hit, we took the step of starting online meetings,
Right.
which I initially resisted because
Sure.
if
Yeah.
there's one thing I know for sure, it's recovery requires relationship.
Yes.
The opposite of addiction is connection.
Yep.
And because I'd made connection in rooms where I could see and touch people, and because I had this belief that real relationships can't form out, it can only form within a shared physical space.
Right. Which, of course, that's ideal. If you just compare being in a shared physical space with being in no space at all, or just with being in a non-shared physical space, of course, it's better. But if you compare being in a shared non-physical space with no connection, that's also much better.
Yeah. And so interestingly, by then we'd had about 10,000 guys register on our homemade website, and we knew that a lot of those guys were not in meetings.
So this is so from 2004 till let's call it 2018. So
Yeah,
something 14
yeah,
or 15 years. You were up over
yeah,
10,000 members in this
yeah.
group.
We were up to 10,000 guys. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So some of the younger guys introduced me to Zoom, and we thought, well, what the heck? Let's give it a try. We formed a nonprofit called Samson House because Samson Society, like a 12-step group, has no dues or fees and really has no budget and doesn't pay anybody. We had to find a way to pay for the website. So we started Samson House, and we actually partnered with Zoom to integrate their technology into the new website, one of the first organizations to do that. And
Oh,
then
wow.
we launched it with a goal of having at least one meeting every hour of every day.
Mm. So
Now,
somewhere
that's
on the
still a
planet.
goal. We're still a good distance from the goal, but we've made tremendous progress. So today we've got multiple meetings every day, all of them hosted by volunteers, already meetings in 8 languages
Right.
as
Wow.
Samson's going global.
Yeah, and where people can be seen for who
Yeah.
they really are, the full self.
And I still do we have a newcomer meeting every day, and I do one a week. And that's my favorite part of the week. That's my favorite hour of the week, just to give some guys some hope. And
Yeah.
I hear,
Yeah, no, I was on a newcomer meeting a few weeks ago, and yeah, it was really interesting to see the tepidness of the first engagement. Is
yeah,
this
yeah,
really going to be safe?
yeah. Oh, yeah,
Right? Is
yeah,
this really okay? Is it really okay? Who's looking over my shoulder type of thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right. And yet then to start to open up because of the leader of the meeting, as coming back to what you said, as being vulnerable about what was going on with them.
yeah. Right.
Right. And then people, oh, wow, wait a minute. If he can say that, maybe I am safe here. Maybe I can come to a place where I can actually be seen and build real connection.
And that's one of the big surprises for me about the online meetings was I was certain that friendships could never be as close in an online meeting as they are in a local meeting. And what we've seen is that very often those relationships, guys get honest quicker
Mm,
sometimes.
yeah,
And I think it's the perceived safety of the digital distance that may
that's
explain,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And then some of those, and one of the things we say in Samson is, Christianity is a team sport, not an individual event. You're going to have a team. You got to have a leader on your team. Where in 12-step recovery, that guy's a sponsor. We have some different vocabulary. We call that guy a Silas. Find that Silas, right? I got to tell you, we do intensives and regional retreats, and then a big national retreat every year. And my favorite part of the national retreat is watching guys hug their best friend for the first time.
Right. Somebody they've never physically seen
Oh,
before.
but that guy knows everything about him,
Right.
right?
Right. They really see them. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which I think, and people like listeners have heard me say this a lot on this podcast, Nate. I think I see you as even more powerful than I love you.
Yes,
Because I love you as a whole bunch of baggage and nobody really knows what it means. But to see somebody without your own biases, without your own upsets, without your own expectations, but to see somebody purely as they are and to see all of them and be comfortable in that is incredibly powerful.
yes, it is.
And so, congratulations to you for creating an environment where men can see each other,
Yeah.
where people can see each other. I mean, that's beautiful, Nate. Congratulations. What would you tell your younger self now? If you could go back, what would you tell your younger self, Nate?
First of all, it's going to be okay.
Mm,
Yeah, I've put so much pressure on myself as a young guy, just to work so hard and to be so careful. Um, it's it's going to be okay, and I'm going to be okay, and I don't need to perform to be accepted.
mm. Man, that's powerful words, right? That you
Yeah,
don't need to perform to be accepted,
yeah,
right? That you can be worthy of love and belonging
yeah,
just by being a child of God,
yeah,
just by being a human being.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Do you think your younger self could have heard that?
I don't know. The programming was pretty strong.
Hmm.
However, and I remember a few interactions. Well, a few is I remember
Hmm.
two interactions with men other than my father. My father was not one who would ever give words of encouragement. He felt it was his duty always to point out your flaws. To give somebody a compliment was to inflate their ego and
Mm, mm,
make them proud. So he wouldn't be caught giving you a compliment.
mm,
There were two men who said, looked at me and told me that I was competent and special and gifted.
mm,
Two or three sentences apiece. And that was like freaking oxygen to me.
mm. That's the way to make the younger you maybe believe it. If we're someone's younger listening to this, or someone that's our age that's speaking into a younger man, is to give them that oxygen, to see them and see where they're doing well, and let them know that you see that.
Yeah.
This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Transition Mastery Coaching. If you have made it to midlife and you're successful and you are going through transitions in your life, in your business, in your career, or in your organization, and you are looking to master those transitions, to make the most of them, to accelerate into the next phase of your organization or your life. If you're facing challenges in your business, challenges in your relationship, challenges in your health, and you really want to transition those quickly, I'm here to guide you for that. And I look forward to working with you. And you can sign up for either Pinnacle Transition Coaching or Summit. Please go to lifeintransition.online/MLTM and scroll to see the Summit and Pinnacle coaching, or reach out to me directly on my email, art@artblanchford.com. And I look forward to connecting with you and helping you to accelerate your transitions to achieve what it is that you want to achieve in the second half in your organization and in your life, so you can live your whole life with no regrets.
And I get to tell guys now, guys who are just at the bottom and they feel like they've blown their whole life up. And, they've blown their marriage apart and they've blown their life apart and they've screwed everything and they're a failure. And to be able to tell them, you'll survive this.
Mm, mm,
And God can bring good out of anything.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
And not every marriage, not every marriage survives, but
Yeah.
every man does.
that's right.
Right?
Yeah,
And and many marriages do. I mean, they
Yeah.
don't just survive; they thrive.
yeah, they
change.
become real.
Absolutely,
right?
right. It's a whole new marriage.
They definitely weren't thriving. I mean, if somebody's into some other sexual relationships besides their partner,
Yeah, yeah,
they're not. That marriage isn't thriving. It may have appearances, but it's not thriving for sure.
exactly. But my wife will actually say that as lousy as those first 20 years were, she'd take them in a heartbeat to get what we have today.
Mm. Wow.
And if recovery has been so revolutionary and so wonderful for us that if the only way to get to recovery was to go through addiction, the addiction's worth it.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'm reflecting on that for myself, and I think for the listeners too, to think about, how deep and dark sometimes may be, but if that's what's necessary to bring out the best in us, if that's what's necessary to let the light into our heart,
Yeah,
right? That's through the broken heart, through the cracks,
yeah,
that the light can come in and
Yeah.
go out both, then it's worthwhile to do, and to hang in there with it, and to see what kind of life can be on the other side. And starting with the moment when we let go. I say let go and let God. To me, that sums up recovery, right? Let go and let God. So no, that's beautiful.
To get to the point where I stop swinging for the fences
Yep.
and life becomes about becoming right-sized.
Yeah.
That's really it. To become a man among men, right?
Yep.
A worker among workers, as Bill W. said, right?
Yep. No,
Yeah.
that's really it. And to be comfortable playing whatever it is that's our part to play, and
That's
to
it.
not want to direct the whole show, right? Which we can't do anyway, right? We can't direct the world. We can't, that's not the way that it works. I mean, I love this little poem that I read recently by Ruby Carr that said, even if we made all the money in the world, we would come up empty,
Mhm.
because it's our souls crave connection. We're meant to be in community, right? And in order to be in community, we have to not set ourselves apart.
Yeah.
And so much of our striving and so much of the ethos, especially in the West today, but it's largely everywhere now. I lived in China and it's the same there for the most part now, is about being separate, standing out and being better than, and, being exceptional. Right. And the thing is that we all, it's the old saying, it's not how smart you are, it's how are you smart.
Hmm.
Right. We're all exceptional in different ways, but not at the expense of being separate or better than, or lording it over other people. Right. Or the flip side, and being worse than, and subservient and so forth. I'm questioning if you, and you already said that you would much rather have the addiction, even your wife would rather have the addiction and have the recovery than not have either. Where do you think, Nate, your life would be if you hadn't had this transformation with the addiction and the recovery? Where do you think your life would be today?
Uh, a, a good chance I'd be dead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Good chance I'd be dead. My marriage would be dead.
Yeah.
And my wife, I abandoned her emotionally
Mm-hmm.
to this addiction. By the time I got into recovery, she was in, man, I think, clinical depression.
Mm-hmm.
The price that she paid, the price that my kids paid, was very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
I can talk about the hundreds of thousands of dollars that I spent on my addiction, but that's just money. My great regret is that I spent my children's childhood.
Mm-hmm.
But the beautiful thing is that there's even redemption there. My kids are thriving now, and I have open, honest relationships with my kids. They thought back in the day that I was 10 feet tall and perfect, and they did their best to perform for me in order to get my approval. They don't feel like they need to perform for me anymore.
All right.
They make me proud, but we have honest conversation.
And was there a time that the relationship with your children was strained?
Actually, no. One of my great regrets is that I actually convinced my kids that my wife was the sick one.
Mm. Mm.
She was the weak one.
Mm.
She was the one who actually held the family together
Right.
during my years.
Yeah.
It was humbling for me to now disclose to my kids what their perfect father had been doing all that time.
Right. Right.
And it's what mended their relationship with their mother.
So the amends that you had to make was to be honest about being dishonest.
Yes.
And then to help recover the relationship with their mother, your wife.
Yeah.
Would that have been possible without your recovery?
No. Oh, no.
Because you couldn't have seen what was the things that you need to make amends for.
Oh, no. I was so oblivious to my egotistical behavior. I just I was doing so much damage and really didn't see it.
Yeah.
I saw myself in heroic terms and as a victim.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
The guy was always misunderstood and nobody knows all I'm doing. And, I'm entitled to this behavior.
Justifying. Yeah.
Yes.
Anatomy of peace. I've talked a lot about that on this podcast as well. What do you feel like, Nate, is your next big transition?
We started Samson Society 20 years ago. And although Samson does not have it doesn't have a leadership structure, an official leader, I'm still seen as kind of the guy guiding it.
Right.
And I need to hand that off to the next generation and let it go.
Yeah.
And that's the big challenge.
Yeah. So another thing
and do something other than dump and run delegation.
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure.
Right?
Yeah, I understand. But also to recognize, again, that it's not about you, right? It's easy. Right. You're the founder and it's easy to be wrapped up in that. And this is really something wonderful and it's really helping me, lots of men, tens of thousands of men. And
right.
And to be able to set it up where it can run without you.
Yeah.
Very successfully, or even maybe more successfully. I hate to admit that, but that's a level 5 leader, right?
Right, exactly.
The organization runs better without you.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's somebody that's in that place in their life where they're still hiding. Nate, what's one tool what's one thing you would say to them right now that anybody can do that's listening to this podcast to start to move their life in the right direction where they're living the great life that you're describing today?
First of all, I would say move now. Here's the thing. We're only capable of continuing in this self-destructive behavior because of the powerful action of denial. We have the ability to close our eyes to the reality of what's actually going on. And this denial instinct kicks in very quickly. Here's what I noticed. We have got, in order to attend a newcomer meeting for the Samson Society, for example, in order to attend the online meetings, you have to go to a newcomer meeting first. And you have to register for that meeting.
Yeah.
Here's what I've noticed. If a guy registers for a meeting the next day or that day, the odds are he's going to make it.
Right.
But if he registers for a meeting that's 2 or 3 or 4 days out,
Yeah.
the odds are he's not going to get there.
Right.
Because that window closes quickly.
Yeah, and the justification kicks back in.
Yeah. And we really want to be able to do this ourselves.
Yeah.
We want to be able, so that story comes back. No, you're close enough. You can figure it out. You can do it. And I can get a sense of accomplishment just by deciding to do something.
Right.
Right. So I would say if as you've heard this conversation, you've had the lights come on and you said, I really need to do something different. There are safe places to go. There are safe places to go. Samson Society is just one of them.
Right. So it's 12-step, any 12-step recovery group, or even an Al-Anon or ACA.
Yeah. I would say go today. And if you can't go today, go tomorrow.
Right.
But don't put it off till 2 or 3 days from now or you won't do it. And it might be another year or two before you get that gift again, if you ever do.
Yeah. And thank you for calling it that. I don't know if it was Alan Watts or somebody I was listening who talked about that. We get that gift of being woken up externally about once every 7 years.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? So while we have that gift, while we've realized, holy cow, my drinking's really a problem, or my overworking is really a problem, or all this dysfunctional stuff I had growing up and I can't get it out of my head. Now my dad or my mom is coming through me with my own kids. If you have that realization, get into a community that can help you get over it and do it in the next day or two so that we don't miss for the next 7 years.
Yes, exactly.
And worry about the impact it takes on our health or our family.
Yeah.
Now that makes sense. And there's a lot of great programs, whether it's Samson or whether there's all these 12-step programs to reach out, but make community. Start even talking with a friend about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So it's not isolating, so you're not trying to do it on your own. Where else can people find out more about you? We'll put everything in the show notes as well, but where would you like to, obviously the Samson Society, what's the website there, and what's some other areas where people can connect with you if they want to? Right.
Send me, I'm actually at work finally 20 years in at actually building out a website at natelarkin.com. I've owned the domain for 20 years. Never had a website there. I will respond, by the way, to emails. Just get me at natelarkin.com. And I'd love to be of any. My sobriety depends upon my continued usefulness and helpfulness to other people. So,
absolutely.
I'm glad to help you.
Step 7 prayer. Both.
There it is.
No, very good, Nate. Well, I really appreciate that your willingness to be vulnerable and to be real, right? And through the grace of your wife or God or whatever you want to call it, that you were able to overcome this image you had of yourself, to be willing to be real, to then give space for other people to also be real and build community. And that's really a beautiful thing.
I don't ever want to go back to that exhausting life of performance.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on Life in Transition, Nate. I really appreciate it.
I've enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Art.
I can't wait to hear what action you are taking. Connect with me on LinkedIn or our website, lifeintransition.online, and let me know. Let a friend know too. It could be a huge encouragement to them and keep you on the track. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and it would mean a lot to me if you left a review and shared this episode with a friend. If you want to learn more about me and what I do when I'm not podcasting, please visit me at artblanchford.com. Thank you for listening. Together, let's make the most of life in transition.